In this episode, we talk about our experience with peer review and the importance of kindness and the advantages and disadvantages of the authors knowing the identity of peer reviewers. And in the second part, we talk about how Twitter can be a great place for science and scientists. My name is Dennis Eckmeyer, my co-host is Bart Gurton, and you're listening to episode 22 of the Science for Societal Progress podcast. Hello, Bart.
Hey, Dennis.
How are you doing?
I'm pretty tired, as always, but I was sick the last week, and then one of my boys got sick, and then another one got sick, and so I basically was out of the lab for 5 days, either being sick myself or looking after the kids.
Oh no. What was it? Cold?
Yeah, cold. And then today, finally, after a long period of like lots of different things, in the morning, one of my sons decided to puke and the other one decided to fall from his bike and deaccelerate with the help of his face.
Oh no. Oh my God. How is
he was pretty fine.
But you also had good news, right?
Oh yeah, we published. We are published. So we handed in on the 30th of August, then waited without doing anything for 4 months, and then published in February. But kudos to them. They actually printed that on the paper. You can see it directly. And they stick up to the things that they do. I didn't think that they really do that.
So you say you didn't do anything for 4 months? But it was in review, was it?
No, actually. So after like 2 months, I wrote them, what about assigning it to an editor? I can see it's not assigned to an editor. And then we got an editor in 10 days. Then that one, after another month, I said, hey, what about giving it to review? And then he said, it's really hard to find a reviewer for that. But interestingly, after 10 days, we found 2 reviewers. And then it took its normal process time.
Oh, okay. So once you got reviewers, it was actually...
It was pretty smooth sailing, yeah.
Yeah.
And I just got another review back that I had to give about another manuscript. When I tried to write my reviews, I always try to do the so-called shit sandwich, where you say something positive and then what you actually want to address negatively, and then something positive again. And I'm always amazed how nicely this works.
Yeah, I think it's always good to start with on a positive note when you communicate in general, because that emphasizes that you are overall positive about the thing.
And it's especially complicated in the review process, as you don't have a normal conversation with another scientist and can say, I have strong doubts about that, and there's your mimic and all the other things that actually make up a conversation, but it's just the text and it has to be interpreted by the other person, etc., etc.
Yeah, well, also you're asked to critique the paper. You're not necessarily asked to say anything positive about it, right?
But I don't get that. So very often, I want to say something positive about the paper, just because I know it's a lot of work and I can see it and I can see the effort that the people take with it. And at least in my field, it's very, very seldom that I get a manuscript that is basically unpublishable because people didn't put enough work in it. It's more often that technicalities or misinterpretations lead to wrong conclusions that have to be corrected. But it's very seldom that I see something that's just badly made, so to speak. And I think we don't give credit for that.
We actually had a conversation on Twitter about that with a guy who said, they rejected my paper basically because there was a misunderstanding about the text, which he understood was his fault because he had ambiguous sentences in the text. But I feel like, on the other hand, as a reviewer, you should be aware that in writing there can be mistakes, right? And that just because you don't understand a sentence or something, you can't just make up what its meaning is and then act as if that's what the person is trying to say. You must be aware that if there's an ambiguous sentence, just tell the author that they need to disambiguate this to make this more clear before a decision is to be made.
I totally agree. What I also don't like often in reviews is that I write something and somebody who clearly didn't understand what I wrote tells me I'm wrong. And for example, this often happens in statistics. Mm-hmm. And people are annoyed that I used whatever test that they didn't know and asked me to use a parametric test. And I can often say, I'm very sorry, but my data is not parametric, and I can't use a parametric test because they're not Gaussian distributed.
Right.
And so it happened to me 2 times that the reviewer actually insisted on a parametric test, and I had to do it, even so knowing that it's wrong, and will still deliver a false positive to my correct positive in my correct test, just to get an off his back.
Yeah, that's not good.
And that's not even not good, it's just stupid.
Yeah. I had a paper rejected twice. Once from 2 reviewers, so it was completely rejected. And then when I sent it, I worked it over and then sent it to another journal. And I thought it was way more clear. But then again, I had 2 reviewers. One was in the field, and the other guy just wrote pretty much the same thing as they did in the previous journal. And it was pretty clear that they didn't care reading the introduction and following the citations, because they straight up told me that there was no evidence for the phenomenon that I was studying. So you know the phenomenon. It's about optic flow and depth perception from optic flow. And this person just said, no, that's not a thing. And there's been publications on that for 40 years.
Me and Friederike Hanke had also a paper about optic flow. And one of the reviewers told us that you can't use optic flow for 3D vision. And so we took out a sentence from our conclusions. And Friederike is quite stone cold about like writing her manuscripts. And when JX Bile offered us to have the cover, we were allowed to write a cover caption. And she took that sentence and put it into the cover caption, which is not peer reviewed. Friederike is such a nice, very thoughtful person, and she just stone cold copy pasted that sentence into that caption. That was pretty cool. But yeah, what I actually wanted to say in the beginning is that whenever I write a review and I don't understand a paragraph, I often write the same sentences like, I'm confused by this paragraph, and I'm deemed by the journal to be the expert on the field. And if I'm confused, I guess a naive reader will be confused as well. So this is what I got out of your paragraph. Maybe rewrite it to the message that you actually want to convey.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I do too. So I actually go through the manuscript the first time more as an editor. Like, I look at the text and I find if there's a mistake, the spelling errors and things like that. And then I make like detailed notes about everything, including like, this sentence is way too complicated. I assume you mean this. And that's what I use for the review. But I do tell the people that this might be mistaken.
And I usually click the checkbox, if possible, that they can tell the authors my name. As long as I don't get a manuscript where the names are hidden, I think it's just an unfair uphill battle for authors to not know who they're fencing with. That worked out pretty nicely for me most of the time. Once I had one other author come up to me at a poster and told me like what he thought of my review. We had a good laugh afterwards, but I could feel there was some tension in there.
Yeah.
But fair enough. Sometimes when I got really, in my eyes as a young student, really unfair reviews, I just wanted to be able to reply to that in an honest way, not in the bullshit way that I'm going to write into the reply. Like how much I enjoyed being told that I was stupid.
Open reviews is an interesting topic, actually. So there are two sides to the story, right? So on the positive side is, as you said, that you know who the other person is, which takes a lot of guesswork out. On the other hand, there's always people who say, yeah, but what about retaliation? So apparently there are very mean people out there. And if you have somebody, an author who's very powerful, and a reviewer who is an early career researcher, this can harm your career, they say. So they say anonymous review is good because then the people cannot retaliate.
I agree. That might be really a concern. But I'm an early career researcher. My career is shit. And if somebody wants to retaliate against me, I don't care. If you really have to retaliate about that things, you have different issues. And they don't face me.
Well, I agree with that, but a lot of people in power have issues.
And that's why I say this is how I deal with it. I don't say that's the way everybody has to deal with it. If you feel safer just not telling your name, I'm totally all right with that. I don't need to know your name if you review me. But I want to give people a chance to actually come back to me and say, I really didn't enjoy that. Please correct your language, or please be more careful, or whatever. I do make mistakes, and I'm happy to stand up for them.
So I've been a reviewer for Frontiers journals, and they have this very interesting online forum review where you can go back and forth with the reviewers, which I found to be super helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good system.
Yeah, there's no stage where you cannot respond. So when I sent it to +1 and it was rejected by two reviewers who clearly didn't know the background of my work, I had no chance to say, but wait, I cited all these articles, all the information you need is there. I can explain it to you in other words. I mean, if you use motion parallax to explain what's happening in the optic flow to see in depth, then a lot of people understand it better. But I was not given the chance. But I was given the chance when I sent it to Frontiers, and that was a big help. So yeah, but they also put the name of the reviewer on the paper if it's accepted.
I once was a reviewer for a paper, and I then met another colleague of mine who works in the same field, who was looking at me and said, how could you let this paper pass? And then was listing all like the problems with this paper. And I was like sitting there in his office holding up my cup of tea and thought like, maybe I shouldn't review papers. So I did the logical thing. I took all his criticisms and wrote the authors and said, listen, I had just had this conversation and all these points came up. Could you please tell me if I was stupid? What's going on here? Seemingly, I didn't see a major problem with your paper.
Did you ask the authors whether they think that you should have rejected their paper?
Basically, yes. But you at least hear the other side to that argument. And then next time you have to defend yourself for the decisions that you took, you can at least say, okay, the reason why this is not as stupid as it sounds is that, and that. And that happens quite a lot of times with me. Like, I don't know, if you read a paper, I often have criticisms about the paper and think like, why didn't they check this or check that? Or this part of their logic is missing to me. And often if I then met the authors and asked them about the publication, they could explain to me what I didn't get in the beginning that actually clarified all my problems with the paper.
Yeah, I mean, talking to the people who wrote it helps a lot understanding what they tried to say in the paper.
Yeah, and I mean, why not? You gave a good example of that. Why not use it also directly during the review process?
Yeah, I think this is the best innovation in peer review that I so far have encountered. This online forum style of review. You can also look at what the other reviewer said. So you can read the conversation that the other reviewer is having with the author, which I also found super helpful.
And you can directly compare if you're using like a positive language against a negative language by how much they really accept your criticism. It's amazing.
I also think in this direct interaction, you're more careful with your criticism, that you don't say things in a mean way.
Funny thing though is, I'm currently writing a paper with another colleague of mine, and we got back reviews, and I was reading them and thought like, oh, well, that's a nice review. And then I came to my colleague and said, yeah, I've read them. I think there's some substance to some points of them. What do you think? And he was like devastated and said, they are all mean and angry and they just don't want us to publish. And that's when for the very first time I realized how strong this inner bias to your own work is. I'm just a second author. I'm pretty removed from the core of the paper. I'm just doing number of analysis for them. And so I saw that like how much my perception of criticism shifts if it's so to say my baby, or if it's just another project.
Right. Yeah, I think that definitely plays a role too. I think there's evidence that people judge written language more negatively. So if you cannot convey emotion, and as you said before, in writing you don't have facial expressions and stuff like that, and gestures, then people tend to read things in a negative way. Yeah, I did things too last week.
Oh.
Yeah. So I mentioned in the last podcast that I was going to do this rotating curation with the Recovering Academic. Recovering Academic is actually a podcast, and they're also running this account where every week there's a different person talking about the topic. And the theme of this is people moving out of academia and how this transition works, and et cetera, et cetera. So I was talking about that. And because I didn't really transition yet, I'm more in the limbo because I'm out of academia. But I don't have a job yet, a real job. So I was asking around about how to become a freelance editor. And I got really good advice from people where you should advertise. So I'm now member of 2 different associations. One is the Council of Science Editors, and one is the European Association of Science Editors. So I'm a member of both of these now. So I invested into the membership, and now I can read the Science Editor, a journal, which is interesting stuff about pretty dry topics, I guess, for most people, because it's about writing and editing Boo. Yeah, but I could advertise now there, so that's good. I'm crossing fingers that people will find me through that. So that's what I'm doing right now. And then I did the AMA basically with the addictive brain on Instagram.
I missed it. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Because the video was recorded and the addictive brain already uploaded it on YouTube. So you can go watch it there. But I also recorded it myself extra, and I'm trying to make actually a small series of 4 videos out of it, because it was 60 minutes talking. So that will be appearing on my YouTube channel at some point, and on my Facebook.
Oh, and next week, it's big conference week in Göttingen. There will be VOCANET, the Women Career Network, and of course the biannual meeting of the Neuroscience Society of Germany, which is one of the, well, I guess the biggest neuroscience meeting in Germany.
Yeah, cool. And you are actually active in both of these things, right?
Yeah. So my students prepared a lot of posters, and I prepared a poster. And my wife asked me, "Why are you making posters? Isn't that just for students?" And thought, well, thanks. Nice to have some support for science. Yeah, anyhow. And yeah, I'm a speaker on the VOCANET, which I'm very, very proud of, because I'm the first male speaker of the Women Career Network, and it's a student organized conference. And it always means a lot to me if students pick you to speak at their meetings and their events, because usually they have no second agenda for that. It's like really interest in the person or the science. And yeah, I see how this goes.
Yeah, cool. But it's not about the science, right? In the Women's Career Network when you're there.
No, I took 2 years of parental leave during my career. And as I understood it, I should give like a male perspective on that years and how this affected my career. Oh, and you can follow VOCANET on Twitter at VOCANET, which is spelled WOCANET.
Okay, so our rotating curation account had its anniversary this month. Actually this week. Actually yesterday.
Hooray! And it's presents for everybody.
Of course, the presents again. Yeah, so we're recording this on March 14th, and March 13th was the day I started the...
Hey, what about the presents now?
No presents, Bart. It's the same deal as last month. No presents. I'm not rich enough for presents.
I feared that.
Yeah.
I'm actually, basically, I knew it because Susan Lehmburg already asked for them, and it didn't happen. Did it?
No, it didn't.
Oh.
If you don't know Susan, she's a very helpful volunteer who's helping me with our rotating curation account that has its anniversary this week, at SFP Rokur. And so I already explained what the idea is behind a rotating curation account. Basically, it means that you try to have every week a different person talking about the topic that you're about. And for Science for Progress, rotating curation, which is what SFP Rokur stands for. The topics are actually quite diverse. They range from open science and science policy to social topics in academia. But we also had science communicators. So yeah, there's a lot of different things. The account is still a little bit small. We have 1,360 followers, which I am happy about each and one of them, of course. And so over the last year, we had 33 people on this account. And thank you very much, everybody who listens to this and was part of SFP Rukur. You made this all happen. I am really happy.
So I like the last curator that we had at OGuest.
Oh, Olivia Guest.
And I liked her stand on programming MATLAB and Python, which is a still ongoing battle in my heart between both programming languages. And I found she had some very, very interesting points to make about them. But I'm still very undecided about both programs. I really enjoyed the discussion. I think it was some really great tweets from her about her different perspective on that.
Right, and I think this is why Twitter is so great. A lot of scientists like Twitter. A lot of scientists are on Twitter because of these kind of conversations that you can have. I think Twitter is more popular among scientists than Facebook, for example. If we talk about social media and scientists. I actually remember from the podcast on altmetrics that I had with Stefan Lemke from the Metrics Project. He mentioned that he read in a publication that social sciences are completely underrepresented in all these altmetric targets, which is social media or other digital repositories where you can look at download numbers and things like that to measure the impact of a publication. But he said the exception was Twitter. So on Twitter, apparently, more science is shared, talking about publications and things like that. Did you find that is true?
Yeah. So I read a number of papers that I first saw on Twitter, and I just joined Twitter last July when we were in Australia, and you made me basically join Twitter.
I did?
It was a really weird situation. I was telling everybody that I'm not really enjoying social media, and then you took my phone and just hooked me up with Twitter.
He's just making that up. I never touched his phone.
He's super oppressive and doesn't give presents. That's all I have to say about that. Now, but you told me to join Twitter and tweet about the conference.
You had some funny handle first, and then you changed it to your name.
Yeah, I changed it to my name because I found out that I used the name that I use everywhere where I use some sort of username. Mm-hmm. And then I changed it to my real name because I thought that I don't want to have another social account where all my friends join for, like, we are being friends. They can also do that, but I wanted to make it strictly about science. Mm-hmm. Or more or less strictly about science, but with a strong focus on scientific stuff. Mm-hmm. It worked out pretty nicely. I think I now have the unbelievable number of 140 followers.
Yeah, everybody follow Bart. It's at Bart Gerten on Twitter. Everybody do that now. He tweets about neuro stuff.
Yeah, and my sons. And my students. A lot about my students. In the beginning, it was pretty slow. It basically felt like shouting into a can all the time. Like, you're standing in the middle of this giant marketplace and then you're like, hey, what about this? And nobody answers. But then it got better.
Because you had so few followers.
Yeah, but as I said, after that, they steadily increased, and it's kind of funny. I like it.
Oh, good.
It's like the number of good conversations that I had was pretty high. The number of annoying conversations pretty low.
Okay.
Which is the opposite of Facebook, for example.
That's true.
I use a style sheet on Facebook that actually hides my timeline. Me.
So you're basically not using Facebook.
Because it's so annoying. One of the major problems with Facebook is that people steadily shout opinions that they wouldn't utter to me in person. And so I took this as like some sort of, if I want to say it nicely, stream of consciousness, but it's more like consciousness diarrhea.
Well, you find that on Twitter too, if you look for it.
Consciousness diarrhea.
All sorts of diarrhea.
No, but but I have more influence about who I follow. And I have the slight feeling that people tend to take more thought to their tweets than to their Facebook postings.
I don't know. I think it's just who you follow. Maybe you are friends with other people on Facebook than you are following on Twitter. But overall, I must say, you can have a great experience on Twitter by starting to follow a lot of people and then sort out who of those actually tweet things that you're interested in. And then at some point, you can start interacting with them if you don't push too hard and just have something interesting to say in one of their conversations or respond to what they have to say. I think I think it's easy to find quote unquote friends on Twitter. So people whose opinions you like and who maybe talk about interesting topics. And then I don't know. I feel like it's a more organic way of building up a community, your own personal community on Twitter. I feel that it works well.
I feel so too. Also, it gives you the opportunity to actually talk to people that you usually wouldn't talk to. And one of my favorite experiments on Twitter was that this year we, like very early, a paper came out that kind of scooped us. Mm-hmm. Not in any mean way. They actually worked on the same thing. We didn't know that. They published before us.
Yeah.
And usually this ends with like people being angry about it, or like you can't talk about it to anybody. Mm-hmm. So the authors published it on Twitter and were like happy about it. And I just wrote them, and I just wrote under that, oh, that is quite surprising. And you beat us to the punch.
Yeah.
And
shit.
I found this quite liberating to once say, it's cool enough, cool for you. Actually, this ruins one of our PhD's theses, but kudos. And at least to me, that made this situation less bitter. Mm-hmm. Even so, I have to say that I don't believe that these people scooped us in the way that they stole the story from us or anything. Yeah. They just were working on the same thing. We didn't know of each other, and they published before us. Totally fair, no bad blood. But the ability to just interact and say, we did the same thing, we come to the same conclusions, too bad, that helps a lot.
Yeah. So what did they say?
They said, we hope that wasn't too bad. Good luck next time.
Yeah. So
they were friendly. And we know each other from conferences. So it was okay. It was they were not totally unknown to me, but that was a nice thing. And actually, I think that makes it much better than not talking about it and just like being angry about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, another interesting Twitter story. Oh, wait, maybe I should first say, yeah, I hear a lot of times that people are actually building collaborations through Twitter, which I find is a great thing. It's a good sign if people can find each other on Twitter and realize that they have common interests and that they can collaborate in a project together. That's definitely a good thing. Yeah. But also you have, I mean, Twitter is known for its huge events, basically. When a hashtag is trending, this often shows up in the news for some reason. And 2 years ago, actually, in 2017, there was a very interesting thing going on. There were scientists and science communicators on Twitter who felt a little bit left out because there are these giants of science communication, I might call them that for lack of a better word, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye. And scientists on Twitter felt like they were not... So these two weren't using their position, being in the spotlight, to actually highlight that there are all these other scientists and science communicators who are actually also doing outreach and science outreach. But in the media, you only see these two. Now, for Neil deGrasse Tyson, I must say he had his podcast, and he actually featured a lot of different scientists on that podcast. I'm not sure how many of the people who got mad at him were actually aware of that fact. But Bill Nye also, so he got his own hashtag, which was Bill Nye Meets Science Twitter. And thousands of people, scientists, would say, "Hey, Bill, my name is so-and-so, and I work on this and this topic," with a picture usually, and so on. And one of them, so I did that, but another person that we both know is Lars Dietrich. He will actually be on the next podcast. But he sent a tweet to Bill Nye too, and that actually gave him a huge experience. So what happened was that Bill Nye said, "Yes, your guys are right. I'm not doing this enough. I should be highlighting and featuring more everyday scientists." I don't know if you could say that, everyday scientists, but, more scientists. And what he did was, for his show, Bill Nye Saves the World, which you can watch on Netflix, for the next season, he started to invite people from Twitter who had tweeted at him about what they do. And he would have, at the end of an episode, one of them in his show to explain their work. And then the next episode of the show would be about the same topic. So he invited Lars Dietrich to come over, and they were having a conversation about 2 minutes at the end of an episode about sleep, which is what Lars was working on. And then the next episode would be on sleep. So I think this is just fantastic that things like this can happen through Twitter.
That's true. Also, you get first of all, I think it's quite nice to meet Bill Nye and be on national TV. And on top of that, being flown to the States to give an interview is pretty nice.
Right, yeah. So Lars, I should say that, had in the meanwhile moved back to Germany from the US, but Bill Nye had to fly him in from Germany to California to record this session. So that's pretty cool. Did we already say that sharing publications on Twitter may increase your citations?
Oh, there's this new paper about it. Is there?
Well, it's not new, but there was an article.
It was new to me.
True, but it was published in 2016, I think.
Okay, cool. But I think definitely that has to change your citation values, because you actually have more exposure to other scientists when you tweet about your papers.
Yes. I personally am still surprised, because I would have thought that people who would be interested. So this is not just reading the paper, right? So I could imagine that people would read the paper more people would read it, because they know about it and maybe they think your work is interesting. But I'm surprised that more people who are in your field read your paper that otherwise wouldn't have. I would have expected that people in your field would read your papers anyways, if it shows up in a literature search, if it's relevant to their work.
I think most papers that if you do normal science stuff work, or what's called, if you're a normal stuff scientist, you have so much work to do that very often the papers that you read have some social connotation. Like you talk about a problem that you have, and then another guy or another person in the lab says, I just read about this and this method, or I just read about this and this topic on Twitter, and there's a new paper about it. And then that really rises the chance of you going onto the net reading that paper, while doing the typical literature research where you go through a lot of papers, read a lot of abstracts. It's usually one of many that you read. And I always have the feeling that there's some key papers to me. Like the first paper that I read about a topic somehow builds like a key in my head to all the other papers that come after, that I read after it. Even so, it might not be the most important paper in the field. It somehow stuck in my memory as the fish paper, or the undulation swimming, or the whatever transient locomotion paper, that then opened all these other papers that I read about this topic.
Right. Because you were following the citations in the paper and maybe look up which papers would cite that article.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Twitter is to me basically like a giant water cooler where I just can get along and have a chat with all the colleagues that are not around in my own lab. And that's part of it, I think. This feeling that you actually read about funny stuff out of other labs. And then you read stuff about science as well. And that makes it such a great tool, because I like to hear about like PhD students actually finishing their degree at the same time, while I read about like friends of mine just publishing new paper, etc., etc. So that's just Twitter at the moment for me.
Yeah, it's like a big place where you can have word of mouth going around a lot, which helps. For the summary and further readings, find the show notes to this episode on www.scienceforprogress.eu. If you have questions, critique or suggestions, get in contact by email info@scienceforprogress.eu or on social media @sci4progress for Twitter and Facebook. Science for Progress is free and accessible. However, in order to keep going and continue to improve and grow, we need your help. You can find information on how to support us on our website if you follow the menu Supporters to Your Support.
Wait a sec, we don't have an ad on that homepage directly when you see it?
Well, there's become a patron.
But you get Google ads or something like that, do you?
No. We are ad-free. I do not make any money. That's why I need people to pay me. I hate Google ads. That's why I don't put them on there.
But they don't hurt anybody.
I also don't think a lot of people visit the website. Guys, you need to visit the website so that Google ads thinks that it makes sense to put ads on this website. Oh, yeah. But the best way to support us is through Patreon. We are halfway to... Actually, no, we're not halfway to financing our monthly expenses anymore, because Bart reduced
I'm sorry, I have a family.
It's okay, Bart, I understand. So, the best way to support us is still through Patreon. And we are kind of almost halfway to financing our monthly expenses. And it would be an enormous relief to have that covered. Check out the perks on www.patreon.com/SciForProgress. My sincerest thanks to those who are already supporting us, including Bart. Thanks for listening. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye, listener.